income for small operators and public transport drivers, equivalent to up to 1,400 pesos per day or 25 US dollars. In addition, this is the largest increase in oil prices since the implementation of the Oil Deregulation Law in 1998. As a result, we expect the inflation to intensify. Meanwhile, the wages of the Filipino working people remained low and stagnant, with workers forced to accept flexible working conditions without enough protection and even lower pay than the legally mandated minimum wages. Oil is considered a price commodity, and with crude oil and its derivatives as the world's primary energy source, imperialist countries, their wars and proxy wars, are being undertaken to gain control of resources, including economic control. And in the Philippines, that is why, like many Asian Pacific countries, we also suffer from imperialist plunder of our resources. When there is overpricing of oil, it can contribute to increase in joblessness, job losses, loss of livelihood, poverty, wages, severe hunger, and crisis. It can be seen that the current cause or the current abnormality in oil pricing is indeed what Lisa said earlier, the speculative trading. We sometimes call it the oil futures trading. Oil is traded between among monopoly financial capitalists who have full control on the prices of oil based on delivery dates and not on current prices. So actually, before oil is being mined from the underground, there is already a set price. When price of oil rises in the market, monopoly capitalists, big national, transnational corporations, and their counterparts in the Philippines do not take liability, the government does not regulate, and people are left to suffer, carry the burden of increased oil prices. In the country's history, President Marcos Sr. sold the oil industry to his accomplices to fund its infrastructure projects, and even borrowed billions from neoliberal institutions, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. That further fueled liberalization, deregulation, including oil deregulation, deregulation of national industries, and privatization of public services. At present, that continues. And one of the legacy of the Duterte administration is the Train Law, which imposed higher taxes on oil and oil products. The government has been clearly receiving demands from the people. For years, working people, informal workers, different representatives from various sectors have been calling to remove the tax imposed on oil. But the only response from the government, from the Department of Finance, is that no, it would result to 147 billions of pesos of losses from the government. However, what we see at present is that there are trillions and trillions of pesos available in the Philippine government funds, and the supposed generation of funds, only if the rich are also paying their taxes, could generate even more funds to help poverty alleviation programs and support workers, including working poor and the women workers, if there are only enough subsidies and assistance provided to them, especially in these most difficult times of war and crisis. What are the concrete effects on the poor and marginalized? Well, with oil price hikes, the poor and the working poor have less chance of being able to access basic needs, to buy basic needs, access basic services, and it is even worse for working women and poor women in the country. Apart from the losses suffered by small operators and public transport drivers, because oil price and importation of parts of vehicles also happen simultaneously, Local manufacturers, small-time operators are also affected. They shell out more compared to what they can earn or take home as their income. 90% of our industry in the country relies on oil. And most of the time, these fuels also price increases. For every peso increase in liter and the price of oil, this results to 1.1 to 1.2% monthly raise in inflation rate. And that results to one of the highest inflation rate this first half of the year, in May 2022, reaching up to 5.4%. Oil price hikes also impacts Filipino peasant, women farmers, and agricultural workers. Because of oil price hikes, we can expect that per kilogram price of rice can increase up to 6 pesos. Add to that the impact of the rice tariffication law, and even the basic food, rice for the Filipino people, will now be not accessible. It is also expected to have a big impact on electricity. For example, Meralco said that it is expected to increase the rate of the consumers consuming 200 kilowatt per hour electricity of up to 80 pesos per month. That is a burden for many Filipinos who are forced to work from home, to our mothers who manage household budgets because they have no economic rights and cannot participate in the world of work. The surcharge in electricity will impact many Filipinos. So we see that monopoly, imperialist wars, profit-making schemes, and implementation of neoliberal policies in the country affect the lives of the Filipino people, including the poor. And we have to put an end to that. That is why today, we join the development workers, peace advocates, human rights defenders in Asia-Pacific and other parts of the world in urging Asian-Pacific governments, specifically in the Philippines, in pushing for the Marcos Jr. administration to listen to the demands of the marginalized sector, to consider the alternatives that is being proposed by the people, including the pro-people development agenda and the pro-Filipino trading system. We underscore our commitment to push the incoming administration to address the economic crisis. We invite all the other civil society organizations and peace-loving citizens to join us to promote and defend people's collective rights and lay the foundation for a just and peaceful society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Very good points, both from Lisa and Rochelle. Now, let's hear the thoughts, position from our reactors. Let's go first to our friends from the people's organizations based here in the Philippines. Our first reactor will be Ray Salinas of Bahaghari, to be followed by Mitzi Jonelle Tan of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, or YACAP. Our third reactor is Amira Ledasan of Sandugo Movement of Moro and Indigenous People for Self-Determination. Of course, next in our lineup is Ronel Arambolo of Pamalakaya. The fifth reactor is Ivan Sukgang of League of Filipino Students. And of course, Dr. Carol Araulio of Bayan. Dear reactors, you have 2 minutes each. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. My name is Ray Valmores. I am from Bahaghari. Bahaghari means rainbow in Filipino, and we are a national alliance of LGBTQIA+ Filipinos and an anti-imperialist organization. This month of June is Pride Month, and it is the time when members of the LGBT community celebrate our diversity, but it is also a time when we stand up against injustice and resist the trampling of our rights. Pride until today continues to be a resistance, and it continues to be a protest. As members of the LGBT community in the Philippines, on top of discrimination and gender-based violence, we face the national struggles that are being faced by Filipinos in a country that is free in name but whose politics, economy, and culture are beholden to the interests of imperialist powers, particularly the United States. In fact, in its bid for super profits and global dominance, the US has made the Philippines its longtime client state. And by that, we mean that we have been turned into their dumping site for excess products, a source for cheap raw materials and cheap labor, and a strategic military base and gateway to the rest of Asia. The Philippines is literally militarized by the United States. And in this militarization that we see until today, it is Filipino women, children, and the LGBT that are disproportionately affected. Only 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, we have seen how Jennifer Laude, a Filipino transgender woman, was denied justice when her killer, Joseph Scott Pemberton, a US Marine, was granted pardon by no less than President Rodrigo Duterte. And this is not an isolated case. In 2005, we have seen Nicole, not her true name, who was raped by US soldiers. None of them were put to justice. In 2008, Rowena Wahid from Mindanao was shot by US soldiers during a military operation in Sulu. Her fellow villager, a pregnant woman, was killed. Her husband was killed. Her children, aged 4 and 9 years old, were killed. None of the US soldiers involved were put to justice. In 2009, Vanessa, not her true name, was raped by a US soldier in Makati. She opted not to press charges in fear of suffering the same fate as Nicole, who was publicly scrutinized and denied justice. And finally, in 2014, we have seen the case of Jennifer Laude, who was killed by a US Marine. Because of the visiting forces agreement, Pemberton was not put in jail and instead was placed in a comfortable special facility where no one else can enter except US soldiers and select Philippine officials. We have seen that none of these soldiers who have committed crimes to Filipinos have ever seen justice. And until now, in only 2 months ago, we have seen the Balikatan exercise continue, the biggest and most expanded version yet. And no doubt, in this global stage that we see, where militarization has gone rampant and these global wars for profit are here, there are no doubts to us, and we have no illusions that the abuses against Filipinos, most especially women, children, and the LGBT, will only worsen.
Hello, everyone. I am Mitzi Janelle Tan from Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. We are an alliance of youth organizations that advocate for climate justice and the defense of our environmental defenders. Climate activists stand with the people against. Climate activists stand with the people against imperialism. Climate activists stand with the people against imperialist wars. We are seeing that armed forces across the globe are among the biggest polluters on the planet, yet including armed forces in emission targets by countries are optional. And in the past, the US has lobbied so that in past climate policies, armed forces emission targets for climate reduction targets are completely removed. And we're seeing that it is the same countries that are leading the imperialist wars that are causing the climate crisis and are historically responsible for the climate crisis that Filipinos are experiencing today. Especially countries like the US, especially the US military being one of the biggest polluters today. And oil price hikes are continuing to make the lives of Filipinos worse every day, and it's the same multinational oil cartels that are gaining from the profit-oriented system that we see. We're seeing that the fight for oil is leading a lot of imperialist wars. It is driving wars, and as the wars exacerbate the climate crisis impacts will also exacerbate those who are victims of wars today. We need to stand up against all imperialist wars and the imperialist countries that are causing the climate crisis and stopping all possible global international collaboration towards actual climate action and climate justice. As long as we live in a world where imperialist wars continue and the oil and fossil fuel industry drives the capitalist imperialist system that we have today, we will not achieve a climate just world.
Assalamualaikum. I am Amira Lidasan of Moro Christian People's Alliance and Sandugo Movement of Moro Indigenous People for Self-Determination. I remember this great statement of President Duterte during his presidential campaign in the early part of his presidency about cutting ties with the U.S. government in economic and political terms. He even used the terms divorce and separation. However, throughout his presidency, this was an empty threat as President Rodrigo Duterte and former U.S. President Donald Trump even renewed the U.S. military mission in the Philippines in 2017, dubbed as Operation Pacific Eagle Philippines, which replaced the Operation Enduring Freedom that lapsed in 2014. This has enabled the U.S. and the Philippines to conduct joint military exercises on a large scale with increased number of U.S. soldiers and the use of fighter jets, assault ships, and drones. In July last year, during the visit of U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in the country, President Duterte renewed the Visiting Forces Agreement. And amid the the Ukraine-Russia war last March, U.S. Balikatan has resumed and was dubbed as the largest, with more than 9,000 U.S. soldiers participating. When the Philippines was identified as the second front of the U.S.-led war on terror in 2001, the Philippine government justified this by saying that Moro armed groups in Mindanao have ties to Al-Qaeda, including non-government organizations and relief institutions. In 2002, the U.S. State Department released a list of foreign terrorist organizations, and this justified the number of U.S. soldiers the U.S. government would deploy in the country and the necessity for joint military exercises. It also released a bounty hunt called Rewards for Justice program that resulted in massive arrest and detention of innocent Moro civilians to fill up the alias warrant against the Abu Sayyaf. Now, internal threats included not only Abu Sayyaf, but now expanded to the U.S. and Multi groups. However, the perennial use of pursuit operations against Abu Sayyaf has led to many encounters of U.S. soldiers with MILF, MNLF, and even the NDF. So, this continuing military intervention and U.S. subservience to the Philippine government to the U.S. government's counterinsurgency program have undermined the peace process of the government with the Moro groups and even the National Democratic Front. Now, what do we expect in the coming President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s presidency? This will continue. Rights violation will continue. Rights violation will continue. And also our sovereignty, violation of our sovereignty rights will also continue. Thank you.
Isang makabuluhang araw po sa ating lahat. Una sa lahat, nais po namin magpaabot ng pasasalamat sa APRNN na nag-organize ng napakamakabuluhang presko na to, hinggil sa issue ng agresyon ng imperialist ng mga bansa. Dahil kaming mga mangingisda ay ang sektor na kumakaharap sa dayong agresyon sa ating karagatan, particularly dyan sa West Philippine Sea. Sa kasalukuyan po ay sa pitong artificial na isla na itinayo dyan sa West Philippine Sea kung saan nilalagakan nila ng mga pasilidad pang-militar na napakalaki ng epekto nito sa seguridad at kabuhayan sa aming mga mangingisda na hindi lingid sa nakararami na makailang beses na kami nakaranas ng mga pangdarahas at pananakot sa mga nagpapatrolyang Chinese Coast Guard. Ang dagyuhang agresyon na ito sa panghimasok sa ating karagatan ay nararamdaman din sa lokal na produksyon ng ating isda na sa katunayan ay bumagsak ng 2% ang produksyon nitong unang 4 ng taon mula sa 970 tungong 971. metric tonelada, 71 metric tonelada. At nangangahulugan din po ito ng pagbagsak ng kabuhayan namin mga mangisda. Kaya mariin ang aming panawagan na ipagtanggol ang soberanya ng bansa sa mga patakaran. Sa ilalim kasi ni Duterte, mas tumindi ang pangaagaw ng China sa ating teritoryo dahil na rin sa kanyang palasokong katangian. Isang patunay dito ang ating ang tagumpay ng Pilipinas sa desisyon ng arbitral ruling na sinabi nila na invalid ang claim ng China dyan sa 9-dash line o exclusive economic zone. Subalit sa halip na kilalanin to ni Duterte ay ibinasura lang niya to ang ating tagumpay. Malinaw sa amin na kaya hinahamon ng mga mangisda ang parating na administrasyon ni Marcos Jr. na tugunan ang mga problemang ito at hindi sapat ang salitang itataguyod niya ang karapatan natin sa West Philippine Sea. Ang kailangan ay konkretong aksyon na talikuran niya ang mga pulisiya na pabor sa imperialismong China. Malinaw sa amin na hindi sa pamamagitan ng gera o pagsandig sa makapangyarihang bansa mag-iresolba ng sigalot sa WPS, kundi sa pamamagitan ng pagtataguyod na nagsasariling patakarang panlabas at nakabase sa mutual na pagkilala sa mga karapatang panteritoryo, patrimonya at soberanya ng kada bansa. Maraming salamat po.
Hello. Militant greetings today to our panelists, reactors, and to the audience of our live stream. I'm Ivan Sokgang, the current national chairperson of the League of Filipino Students. And as the leading anti-imperialist youth organization here in the Philippines, we call on the youth to fight back here in the Philippines and abroad. From the Philippines and abroad. From the bombing of Lumad schools in Mindanao in service of the interests of Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea, the Filipino youth and the different sectors of our society are victimized by the continuing global war and imperialist aggression. The youth especially are victimized by the neoliberalization of our education system, by the implementation of the K-12 program, worsened only by the failed COVID response of the Philippine government. This has resulted in an education crisis and the continued export of our young workers supply chain. Marcos Jr. is expected to continue Duterte's policy of dual puppetry to the United States and to China, with the worsening contradict expected to continue Duterte's policy of dual pins in a dangerous position of being caught in between the military aggression of these imperialist powers. In fighting for our national sovereignty, we cannot expect Marcos Jr. and the neo-colonial Philippine government to stand for the Filipino people when they themselves are engaged in the sale of our territory and national patrimony. It is up to us, the Filipino people, and all oppressed people of the world to fight against imperialist aggression and assert our independence as sovereign nations. It was the mass mobilizations and protests of the youth together with other sectors of society that pressured the Philippine Senate to end the military bases agreement in 1992. Today, the youth is ready to heed the call of fighting for our independence and democratic rights. The future is in our hands, and only through the basic sectors of will we be able to end the traitorous and illegitimate regime of Marcos and Duterte and fight back against imperialist aggression. Good day to all, and thank you.
Bayan is a national multi-sectoral alliance fighting for national and social liberation in the Philippines. It has been at the forefront of the campaign for an independent foreign policy, the defense of national sovereignty and patrimony against foreign domination and intrusions, and the removal of all foreign troops in the country. Bayan has also forged unity with anti-imperialist forces in the Asia-Pacific and globally in opposition to wars of intervention and aggression and all forms of neo-colonial domination by the advanced capitalist powers. Bayan challenges the incoming Marcos II administration to reveal its program and policies to address the dire socioeconomic situation of the people, especially post-pandemic, and as a result of a failed neoliberal paradigm imposed by the World Trade Organization, the IMF, World Bank, and other multilateral institutions, and lobbied by various monopoly capitalist interests and agents. This has placed the Philippines in a most unfavorable situation, as shown by the effects of the war in Ukraine on skyrocketing oil prices and runaway inflation. Bayan puts the Marcos II administration on notice that the previous Duterte administration's duplicitous rhetoric about forging an independent foreign policy has already been exposed as empty bombast. Duterte has pursued a blatantly pro-China policy, but has maintained all the lopsided military agreements with the US despite earlier threats about the revocation of the Visiting Forces Agreement. And his economic managers have not deviated from the neoliberal policies of liberalization, deregulation, and privatization favored by the US and China. Moreover, the tyrannical regime of Duterte has implemented a bloody counterinsurgency war patterned after the US counterinsurgency playbook that has left a trail of gross and grievous human rights violations and entrenched impunity for these crimes against the people in a bid to maintain US support for his regime. Shall we expect then the same fascist policies tantamount to state terror against critics, dissenters, and opposition to his regime, and an antagonistic policy against peace negotiations? Shall we expect a phlegmatic, if not traitorous, stance on the West Philippine Sea and other critical issues vis-a-vis China investments and loans to the country? Shall we expect more of the dovetailing, if not kowtowing, of foreign policy to that of the US, other Western imperialist powers, and their regional allies? Thus, Bayan and its allied mass organizations vow to stand firm in its anti-imperialist position and to continuously challenge and oppose pro-imperialist policies of the Marcos II administration detrimental to our people's rights and welfare. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you so much to all our Philippine-based organizations, YAKAP, Bahaghari, Pamalakaya, ILER, LFS, and of course, Sandugo. Very clear picture, my dear friends, of the impact of these imperialist wars to the Filipino people. And of course, we should continue challenging the new administration on these foreign policies that has great effect in the lives of the masses. We would like to acknowledge the presence of the civil society groups, journalists, and media, both online and on-site, who are here with us. Thank you for coming to this timely event. And now, for our second panel, we're going to hear the reaction, the thoughts of our friends from different organizations in Asia and the Pacific. The first reactor will be Yoshio Nakamura of the Asia-wide campaign against US-Japanese aggression and domination in Asia, or AWC International. The second reactor, we will be playing the video message of Reverend Jang Won-jang from Osint Migrant Workers Center in South Korea, to be followed by former Senator Lee Rhiannon, a board member of AidWatch Australia, and of course also part of the iChirp Investigate PH. Our last reactor for this panel is Tirtha Prasad Saikia from a humanitarian organization based in Assam, India, which is the Northeast Affected Area Development Society or NEEDS. Nakamura-san, you may proceed.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Yoshio Nakamura from AWC Japan, People's Organization Against War, Military Bases, and Neoliberalism. I want to briefly comment about the U.S. pivot to Asia or the recent tightening U.S. containment policies to China and its impact to Japan. Our most concern is ongoing strengthening of the U.S.-Japanese military alliance and further reinforcement of the U.S. military bases in different areas of Japan. It includes a new rebuilding of the huge U.S. Marine base in Okinawa Island. It will just impose further burden to the people, rising political and military tension in the region. At the same time, I want to point out the Japanese government's active role coincided with the US regional strategy, such as hosting of the Quad Summit meeting in Tokyo on last May. In fact, it is one of the latest efforts to build collective security framework in the region and to tighten the US-Japanese imperialist control under the slogan of the open, free and open in the Pacific. Japanese government also pursued Japanese own military building up. Recently, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida expressed his plan to double increase of military budget for next 5 years. He also planned to attend the NATO summit meeting on the end of this month. The US President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida tried to justify the militarization, propagating China's thought or possibility of emergency over Taiwan Straits. But we believe that main or bigger factors of the rising tension in the region are such US and Japanese maneuvers. As like people in other countries in the region, people in Japan are facing rising cost of oil and other basic commodities. We are demanding the money should be used for people's needs, not military spendings. We also demand peace in the region, not war, in solidarity with the people in the Asia Pacific. Thank you very much.
동지들 반갑습니다. 우리는 지난 5월 23일 국제 반전 캠페인을 참가하여 미 제국주의의 전쟁 세력의 아시아 태평양, 중국, 대만, 한반도 전쟁 지역으로 만들려는 계획을 반대하는 반전 투쟁을 함께 하였습니다. 나는 오산 이주노동자센터 대표, 오산 다솜 노동자 민중교회 목사입니다. 오랫동안 APWS와 ILPS 한국위원회를 대표하고 있습니다. 한국 국민은 지난 5월 21일에서 24일까지 존 바이든이 미국 대통령의 급박한 첫 아시아 순방을 맞이하면서 주요 의제가 그 의미를 우리는 알고 있습니다. 특히 한국과 일본에서 당시 버락 오바마 대통령이 시작했고 현재 바이든 대통령에 의해 강화된 미국의 인도태평양 전략 중심점과 일치합니다. 우리는 한반도의 평화를 원하기 때문에 많은 걱정을 합니다. 특히 지금 3개월간 진행 중인 아시아 우크라이나 분쟁에서 평화주기를 위해 캠페인을 하고 제 3차 세계대전을 반대합니다.
My name is Lee Rhiannon. Thank you to the organisers of the Fight Against Imperialist Wars campaign. This work is vital for the sake of all humanity and for the very future of the planet. I've been asked to speak about AUKUS, a pact between US, Britain and Australia. This military and security pact is escalating the threat of war in the Pacific Indian Oceans region. AUKUS, like the other military and security pacts of Five Eyes Alliance, Quad and NATO, are about helping the US ensure it is the world's lone superpower. Lisa, in her opening remarks, said this out very clearly. These pacts are insidious. Not only do they kill people, they literally rob billions of dollars from programs to address people's needs and for environmental protection. The regional damage these alliances cause cannot be overstated. This is crude neocolonialism. It's about helping the US establishment and, in fact, all corporate interests expand into Asian domestic markets while exploiting local cheap labour and robbing local resources. AUKUS has a strong imperial ring to it. As this pact involves only the US, Britain and Australia, it has elevated what many are calling the Anglosphere, as though that section of the world has a right to dominate the Indo-Pacific region. This pact deepens confrontational attitudes in the region, as we've heard from many of the other speakers, particularly with China. AUKUS is about using the region for intelligence gathering, to house their troops, and to set up bases for possible attacks. A spin-off is an increase in a regional arms race. AUKUS has pushed Australia to being a major actor in regional geopolitical disputes. If we look at who AUKUS has reached out to in the region, what we find is that it's India and the Philippines, two authoritarian regimes that are increasingly being described as fascist. AUKUS needs to be exposed for its true intent. We can do this through raising public awareness of the dangers it poses, promoting cooperation, not confrontation between nations, and building a global peace and anti-imperialist movement. I think today's event, where we're able to speak to sections of the media and hear from each other, is a huge contribution to achieving that. Thank you.
Sorry, my mic was mute. Hi everyone, this is Tirthor Prasad Saikia. I'm working with an organization called Northeast Affected Area Development Society, NEEDS in Assam, based in northeast part of India. We have been working in humanitarian response and advocacy, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, human rights and sustainable development in the region. Currently, for the last 2 months, the people of Assam, we are going through a massive humanitarian crisis that is caused by floods. And this is mostly triggered and intensified because of development aggression, like large dam in the upstream, and because of that release of excessive water from them, people in the downstream, they are highly affected. And as of now, based on the reports and the situation update, more than 5 million community, more than 5 million populations are being highly affected. And it's almost 100 people who have lost their lives. And it is like near to 5,000 villages who are being highly affected because of the crisis. And and along with that, the price rise, the skyrocketing pricing of oil and natural gas, also the basic amenities, the price rise of high price rise of daily needs, it is really creating an economic impact among the affected population. People are in a position and not able to afford in a market to buy their essential goods in day-to-day life. Even though Assam as a state, we contribute a lot in producing fuel and natural gas, people are not in a position to afford these items in a fair price. So that is like another blow to the community who are living in the reality. And with this crisis, all disasters, including the pandemic, people are in a position where they are losing their human rights. I think all these started, the price rocketing of fuel and natural gas is started because of the war between Ukraine and Russia. So as organization working in the grassroots in humanitarian crisis, or working with the people's rights, or being a organization fighting for injustice, fighting against injustice, we would like to stand united as Asia Pacific peoples against imperialist war. And we also stand in solidarity with all the affected people in the world who are affected by imperialist wars. With this, I would like to pause. Thank you. Over to you.
Reverend Jiang, former Senator Lee Rhiannon, and of course, Tirta. From the global context, they have discussed Quad, the people's resistance against U.S. imperialist economic, political, and military rule in Japan, to the discussion of BRICS in Korean Peninsula, the military presence in Korea, of course, the issue of AUKUS, how it should be exposed as discussed by former Senator Lee Rhiannon, and the humanitarian crisis in India, and of course, in all other parts of the Asia Pacific. Dear friends, the floor is now open for our friends in the media for the question and answer. You may also ask questions from our panelists who are joining us online. For our Philippine-based organizations, if you wish, you may also speak in Filipino because in Zoom we have an Filipino to English interpreter for our friends from other nations. Yes, sir. Kindly state your name and.
Hi everyone, I'm Tristan Odalo, CNN Philippines from CNN. Sir, siguro to Pamalakaya and the rest of the panel. So, I think 2 weeks ago, President-elect Bongbong Marcos has expressed his intent to continue the so-called independent foreign policy of President Rodrigo Duterte. He even mentioned that China is the country's strongest partner so far in the region. So parang ang perspective ng iba, parang how different will it be from the current administration if he will pursue an independent foreign policy. But few weeks back, nagsabi rin naman si President Marcos na i-assert niya yung arbitral ruling and we cannot surrender a millimeter of our territory to other countries. So siguro po, how do you view so far this pronouncements of President Marcos? If indeed he will pursue an independent foreign policy, how independent do you think it would be and how can he make it independent?
Hello ma'am, magandang umaga ulit. Sa amin, tulad ng sinabi namin, nabanggit ko po kanina na na yun yung aming matagal ng kahilingan na dapat magkaroon tayo ng independent policy na hindi naka ayon sa interest ng mga dayuhan ng imperialistang China dahil batid naman natin na ang mga polisiya ng ating bansa ay nakasalig at umaayon sa interest ng mga dayuhang imperialista tulad ng China. Ay ang mga katulad ng liberalization policies na siyang nagiging dahilan kung bakit nababangkarote ang ating agrikultura dahil sa malaya ngunit makaisang panig pabor sa mga dayuhan yung ating mga pulisiya. So, yun yung aming panawagan kay sa parating na administrasyon ni Bongbong Marcos kung talagang seryoso siya, solusyonan yung problema natin. Maraming salamat po.
Kung gagamitin ko ang linggo ng showbiz, wala naman masyadong pinaghuhugutan si Marcos Jr. kung ang pagbabatayan niya ay yung ehemplo o yung president na binigay ni Pangulong Duterte na independent foreign policy in name but not in practice. Ang masasabi ko lang, ang nagbago para sa kay Presidente Duterte ay pagkilala niya na isa ng malakas na kapitalistang bansa ang China at gusto niyang makakuha ng mga investments at iba pang mga pabuya mula sa China. Kaya nakikipagsayaw siya sa China. Ngayon, ibig sabihin ba nito ay nag-pivot na siya from the US to China? Hindi naman. Ibig sabihin, naglalaro, namamangka sa dalawang ilog. Pero pabor pa rin talaga sa US in the sense na wala naman nagbago eh. Wala naman siyang binago dun sa makaisang panig o lopsided relationship between the US as a former colonial power, a former colonizer of the Philippines at ang Pilipinas. Ngayon, lalo na kung ang paghuhugutan niya, if he will draw his foreign policy from the precedent of his late father, wala naman siya masyadong huhugutin doon dahil sa malinaw yung pagiging sunod-sunuran, pagiging tuta ng kanyang diktadura ni Marcos sa US dahil sa kinailangan niya ito para suportahan yung kanyang diktadura. So, independent foreign policy, placard lang yan, no? Pantabing dun sa totoong patakaran panlabas na nangangayupapa sa mga dayuhang interes.
Siguro pwede nating sabihin na yung independent forest policy is not a policy of accommodation. No? Kasi parang ganun eh. Katulad nung, kung ang kanyang pagbabatayan ay yung ginawa ni President Duterte before, it is largely a policy of accommodation, not an independent foreign policy. No? Kasi ibig sabihin, accommodate niyang interest ng US, andyan pa rin yung mga VFA, andyan pa rin yung yung kanilang mga yung mga investments dito na unregulated, no? So it's accommodation as well as China, it's also a policy of accommodation, no? And we know why it is a policy of accommodation because they're benefiting from it, di ba? Merong mga ganansya na nakukuha itong ating mga opisyales sa policy na yan. Kaya ibang-iba yung independent foreign policy doon sa policy of accommodation. At dapat si si Marcos Jr. ay sagutin yung yung let's get down to brass tacks, no? Halimbawa, ano ang posisyon niya doon sa mga mangingisda na binobomba ng tubig o kaya pinapaputukan ng mga ng China at hindi pinapayagan na mag-fish doon sa waters natin, no, sa Philippine waters. Ano ang posisyon niya doon sa pagka nakakagawa ng krimen yung mga sundalo, sundalong Amerikano ay nakakalaya na lang ang mga sundalong ito. Ano ang posisyon niya kung yung ating mga natural resources at saka yung ating mga patrimonio ay nasisira nitong mga military exercises na ito, na nagkaroon na tayo ng karanasan niya nung panahon ng mga military exercises ng Estados Unidos. So marami, no? Let him answer these questions and then you can see what kind of independent foreign policy he's talking about.
Thank you, Ronel, Carol, and Lisa. Lee Rhiannon would also like to respond to that question.
Thank you very much. Look, I think similar questions could be asked in terms of the foreign policy of many countries, because we're seeing escalating antagonism. It's something that's really serious in Australia also, where we're becoming both the previous Conservative government, the new Social Democrat government, are quite obsessive about beating the drum about China. And I just wanted to recap on a little bit of history here, which I think shows a different way this can be handled. It's worth remembering that it was the Chinese Revolution occurs in 1949, and there was all the hysteria around another communist country. It was about 20 years later that the thaw started between the West and China. And how that occurred is that they started actually talking about non-militaristic issues. It wasn't just an escalating of the language in a very aggressive way, but the issues that started to be talked about was, and it was actually sport that was the first one. It was often called ping pong diplomacy, was sport and trade, academic and cultural. And I think we need to be seeing foreign policy in those terms as well, and talking about, like countries have the very different approaches. We have different histories, we'll have different regimes. At times we may think they're really terrible, but do we want to be increasing the rhetoric about how we need to attack them and remove them? And I'm not denying obviously the struggles around self-determination, that is critical and that will go on. But in terms of this government to government approach, I think that the encouraging our respective governments to also to be looking at these channels so people get to know each other and know that we're all human beings and that we have to learn to live together. So the trade, the academic, the cultural and the sport need to be seen as part of foreign policy. So I just wanted to bring that in. Thank you.
Any more questions from our friends from the media? And also for those who are joining us online? Or even from our attendees or participants via Zoom, you may also ask questions to our reactors and presenters. Or our guest here. All right. There will be a photo opportunity for right now for our reactors and panelists. May we request our panelists online to turn on their cameras? And ready your bells of peace as our symbolic action. As more wars break out, people are faced with intensified vulnerability and repression. More than ever, Peoples of Asia Pacific need to strengthen people's movements against imperialist wars while building solidarity among peoples asserting their collective democratic rights, self-determination, and social and national liberation. As a symbol of our collective action to end all wars of aggression, to fight against imperialist wars, and to free the people, we ring our bells of peace. Dear friends, join me in our call. The people united. The people united. If I say, what do we want? Let's say peace. What do we want?
Peace.
What do we want?
Peace.
What do we want?
Peace.
And of course, if I say oil deregulation law, ibasura. Oil deregulation law. Oil deregulation law. If I say end all wars of aggression, let's say free the people. End all wars of aggression.
Free the people.
End all wars of aggression.
Free the people.
End all wars of aggression.
Free the people.
The people united.
Never be defeated.
What do we want? What do we want?
Peace.
All deregulation law. End all wars of aggression. End all wars of aggression. Thank you so much, dear friends, for joining us today. Should you request for further interview from our reactors, you may just coordinate with our media liaison, Kate and Nico. We will be serving lunch here today. Of course, let's continue to call to end all wars of aggression, fight against imperialist wars, free the people. This hybrid global press conference is co-organized by Asia Pacific Research Network, International League of People's Struggles, and Bayan Philippines. Thank you so much, dear friends. Long live international solidarity! Long live international solidarity! Maraming salamat at mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Nakamura-san. Really appreciate your... Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Jang. Thank you, Tirtha.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Sending you warmest regards of our solidarity from here. I hope we can see each other very soon. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. What a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yep.